Okay, so video number 2, let's focus on Asia, really, and imperialism in Asia. And then we got to start with foreign policy ideas in China. Now, obviously, China's been a big player. It's a large country, has a large population, many resources. We've talked about them in the ancient world with the Silk Road trade. We've talked about them in the kind of medieval world with the Indian Ocean trade, basin trade. China is a major player when it comes to trade. So, of course, when it comes to imperialization, China is going to be on the main stage as a place to go after when it comes to importance, especially for European countries and how to make themselves valuable or make money or make themselves powerful. Okay, so when we look at this, when we look at China, because China is so large, what's going to happen is foreign countries, whether they be the British, the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Japanese, or the Americans, are really going to kind of like press themselves into China, trying to make deals. Now, this is going to be a difficult transition because the Chinese government has to work with these different countries. But what's going to end up happening is each foreign power is going to create what is called a sphere of influence. And think about what a sphere is. It's a circle. And, of course, influence on that different sections of China to try to colonize it. Now, it's very difficult to colonize China because it's so big, okay? But individual provinces are going to get influenced by the colonizers, the attempted colonizers in China. And that's going to go really with the trade and access in and out to ports and where money is going to be made and more raw materials to go back for industrialization. So when we look at this, I show you this map. All right, here you have 1910. Again, we're pre-World War I. All right, I'll slide myself up over here. But it is the imperialistic spheres of influence right around World War I. And what I want you to notice with this map, if I slide it up here, is the chart on the bottom. You see the British along the Yellow River here, all right, and Hangzhou, and up here in the mountains, of course, they're going to have influence over India, and that's going to be a carryover. You can see the French in the lower Canton region. You can see the British in Hong Kong, which we'll talk about here in a second. Macau with the Portuguese. You have the Japanese creating spheres of influence. Again, they want, especially up here in Manchuria, that's going to be a big point of contention. The Russians acting as a player here. And, of course, now you also have the Germans in this section of China. And what's going to end up happening is the resources that are going to come out of these areas become very critical. So, for example, not only connection to India for the British, but also what's being grown up here, which is opium. Okay, this opium becomes very critical for the trade, and opium relaxes people. Technically, it gets you high. So that became a major trade deal, especially within China. And if that opium can get down to the ports where Hong Kong is going to be controlled, then that became a very big money grab and land grab for the British. As a matter of fact, the British and the Chinese will fight the opium wars over this, of which the British will win, of course, with their dominance, not just as a military, but also as a government. And they'll come up with the Treaty of Nanjing, which gives the port of Hong Kong to the British, and the ports here to the British, which gives Britain really a lot of control in China. All right, so the other issue is, what are we going to do with the United States? Now, I know we're talking about world history here, but the United States as a world power starts to really kind of take shape. You know, here we are as the United States moving forward. We're becoming a wealthy, industrialized nation in the late 19th century into the early 20th century, and the United States wants a piece of this pie too, okay? So what's going to happen is the United States is going to make a deal with the Chinese government to create what is called an open door policy. And you need to underline that or highlight that, this idea of open door policy, which will keep China open to trade, specifically with the United States. And when that happens, other European powers cannot cut the U.S. off. So now we have access to the Pacific and the ports of China, and it gives the U.S. now a place to look to sell and get raw materials. But when that does that, what the Americans kind of promise the Chinese is that they'll never be colonized. So even though it's broken up in spheres of influence, this open door policy really protects the Chinese in the long run from being colonized by European countries. And of course, that's going to turn the tide as we move forward into World War I and into World War II. And that's really what it was. The merchants wanted a piece of the Chinese market. There's so many raw materials, there's so many people to sell to. That's what they're really shooting for. Okay. Now, and again, like I said earlier, the open door policy keeps China from being colonized, and that's a big reason why China becomes what it is today, because it never really does get colonized. It's never really put on the back burner. It's in the forefront the whole time, and remains a free and independent country, especially as we go through World War I and World War II. Even into communism, China becomes a major, major player there. All right, so not everybody in China liked this. They didn't like the Western nations and the Western countries being there. And one group was called the Boxers, and this is what's called the Boxer Rebellion. They're actually called the Organization of Harmonious Fists. If I show you the picture, they're going to look like ninjas to a degree. But their whole thing was they didn't want to be influenced by Western powers. They wanted to keep Chinese culture the way it was. So they're going to try to fight back, hence the idea of the rebellion. Now, the term boxer comes from the Europeans because they didn't know much about the martial arts in Asia. What they knew was boxing, pugilists, guys fighting with their hands. So they called them boxers based on that idea. Unfortunately, though the Boxers will be somewhat successful in getting their point across, they are not going to be successful by keeping Western countries out, because there's just too many Western countries that are going to organize together to fight this alliance. The other issue is the Boxers believed that magic was going to protect them from bullets. Bad idea. Bad. Magic does not protect you from bullets. And they're going to be killed very easily as they try to raid into European influenced areas. So the Boxer Rebellion is important because it shows, and here are the Boxers right here, it really shows that obviously not everybody is going to sit back and allow Western countries just to take over, and the Boxers are one group. The Boxers went after government. There's going to be an earlier Taiping rebellion where it's just trying to overthrow this weak government that's being influenced by Western countries. So the Chinese are not going to take this sitting down. However, they're not strong enough to push forward. It's not really until communism comes about in the 1920s where China is really going to become its own really true independent without Western influence country. Okay, these were Chinese peasants who were fed up. That's kind of what I was getting at earlier. Fed up with taking other nations taking over their country. Okay, another place we got to look at in Asia is India. Okay, and the British control of India, especially after the American Civil War, and especially the American Revolution, but really the American Civil War, when the South is kind of cut off from British influence and trade, especially with cotton. The British need cotton from somewhere else to really bring their textile factories forward. Okay, so India has that cotton. And that's a big reason why they're going to go into India to really take over. So the first thing is, again, we talked about the British East India Company before, how it really works as its own sovereign state. It's a capitalistic economy or a capitalistic business that's also running areas. So the British East India Company is going to go down and expose what is called the Mughal Empire of India, a very weakening Mughal empire, especially in the south of India. The Mughals, which is an Indian term for the word Mongol, really is an Islamic empire that had been in India for hundreds of years, even though it's in a very Hindu culture, and they work pretty well together. But what's going to happen is over time is the Hindus are going to try to retake the land, and when that happens, it opens the British to walk right in and take. And they're coming in right at the right time at the end of the 18th century, early 19th century, and they're going to take India from the Mughals. Okay, so with that, the British exploit the diversity. Again, 1,300 British are going to control 300 million Indians, and they're really going to play Muslims and Hindus and Northern Indians versus Southern Indians against each other, and they exploit that diversity for their own gain. Okay, and the British are really going to get a lot of control. Especially remember with Hinduism, you have the caste system, so you have a social class system, and they're going to play the caste system against each other. The British are going to support the wealthy Brahmin type caste people and give them money and give them support to really keep the bottom level caste down and force them to work. So you have exploitation there. You also have this assimilation where the East India Company begins to rid India of native culture, making them act European, act English, force them to speak English, act English, be like the English. And it really starts to change Indian culture, especially those amongst the wealthier class of people. All right. Now, it's not going to go without conflict. You're going to have an issue down there with what are called the sepoys. The sepoys were Indian soldiers that were actually hired by the British. How brilliant is this? Don't even send British military down there. Just make the Indians do it. Pay them money, make them dress like European soldiers, teach them how to fight, and then they hold the other Indians down. What an amazing idea. All right, again, it's exploitation. But the problem is, there was a rumor going around that, the sepoys are both Hindu and Muslim, that when they would rip the bag open with their teeth to get the ball out to put it into the gun, that grease that was being used was either pork or beef grease, cow grease. And of course, if you're Hindu, you're venerating cows. So cow grease is bad news. And if you're Muslim, you don't eat pork. So that's bad news. Of course, there is a rebellion, a sepoy rebellion, because they really feel like the British are undermining their religion and being disrespected, which they kind of were, and they try to fight back. Okay, of course, it's a rebellion, so it's not overly successful, but it's the early stages of rebellion against the British. Eventually, by 1947, the British will be pushed out. So the sepoy rebellion is crushed, all right, and that's going to happen, but it kind of lays the beginning of Indian nationalism, all right? And the British are going to control all of India. That's going to be a big deal here, and they're going to have a lot of power because of it. It becomes the jewel of Asia, the jewel for the British to have India, okay? Now, because of this, so like I said, Indian nationalism does grow, and it eventually leads to independence, but it's going to take some time to get there, and that's 1947. All right, another big issue going on, or a big idea, is the American movement into the Pacific. All right, Commodore Matthew Perry, who's an American naval Commodore, is going to sail American steel ships into Tokyo Harbor. Now, it's going to be important on many levels. One, it opens Japan up for trade. Japan had not really been open for trade before. They didn't want to deal with Europeans. They stayed to themselves. But more importantly, what it does is it modernizes Japan. At the time, Japan was still going through a very feudal system. Okay, it was falling under what was called the Togawa shogunate. Okay, and they were really behind the times, even though they're a very advanced country. They're very behind the times when it came to industrialization. And when the Americans rolled up these massive steel ships, the Japanese looked at each other very fearfully and said, "This is not good. We're behind, and something has to happen." So what the Japanese decided to do is to get rid of the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, get rid of this old feudal system, get rid of these ideas of samurais, and modernize, okay? And it's going to go through what's known as the Meiji Restoration. And in the Meiji Restoration, in a very short period of time, roughly about 10 years, Japan is going to go from a very ancient feudalistic culture to a modern industrial power. And when that happens, they also want to imperialize. All right, so you look at the movements towards war, Japan's going to be in there. You got to understand, Western Europeans and the Americans saw the Japan as almost equal. The Japanese is almost equal because they were industrialized. They were almost like the whites. They had a long, rich culture, and now they're moving forward, okay? And when Japan gets involved in World War I and goes after China, that's going to be a major, major player, okay? But those issues that are going to happen at World War I to Japan are going to lead to what they do in World War II. But this really pushes Japan forward. This is the Meiji Restoration. This is really big. All right, in the next video, we'll talk about imperialism in Latin America.